What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are, man, Flash War. Dude, okay, Joshua Williamson. All right, I already owe Sean Murphy lunch, and I don't see any reason why we can't bring in Joshua Williamson. Dude, Joshua Williamson, man, if you ever stop writing The Flash, I'm gonna be so pissed. His work on Flash is nuts, and this story is no different. And here's a funny thing. It's like the culmination of everything we've been waiting for since like the beginning of DC Rebirth and the return of classic Wally West. It's like the one thing we always wanted to see. And there's so many great moments in this. Okay. So initially this whole thing picks up with like Flash and Barry going to war, right? Like they're just kind of like against each other, and it's like, well, if you're not gonna help me, then, you know, whatever, like Wally West just kind of freaking out on him. But we're not really given any context as to why. What we end up doing is kind of jumping back a little bit about almost an hour earlier, and just kind of picking up with this whole thing. And this is kind of cool because this is an exchange between Iris West and the new 52 Wally West. But the difference here is that when it comes to like this exchange, it's different from the other ones that we've seen, because now Iris is totally aware of Wally, right? Like that was the whole thing. When classic Wally West first came back, red-haired Wally West, when he first reappeared, we knew from just like the history of DC that like he and Iris have like a long-standing history because they're family. But when he first appeared, he didn't want to like instigate a whole situation with Iris and like reveal to her his identity and so on and so forth. And that was just really like Williamson's way of working into DC Rebirth, in the sense that Rebirth is designed to bring back all the old stuff and work it into all the new stuff and kind of combine these two elements together. It created this idea that like classic Wally West was back, but we didn't know how far out his role would be. And over the course of the Flash run, and really as far as like the events in Titans and so on and so forth, we got these little tidbits where like little bits of classic Wally West past would kind of pop back up again. And so it's kind of cool because this scenario is basically like they're both aware of the idea of like who classic Wally West is and what's going on with this guy and so on and so forth. And it's interesting because then you have like Barry and Wally, who basically show up having dealt with, you know, a major issue and have just kind of like raced to this location. And it's one of the funny things because I still say that Wally West is faster than Barry, but like it's a funny situation, right? Like, because the way they're drawn here, it's awesome. It's like Ryu versus Ken. Like who's better in Street Fighter, Ryu or Ken? I say Ken because it was like in the old school Street Fighter games, he was faster. I don't know if he's still faster now. I haven't played Street Fighter in like 10 years, but still like it's interesting to me because what this does is it starts to throw in this idea that Wally West is getting a little more extreme in terms of the lengths that he will go to try to like bring his past back. And that works. It's not like it's a sudden shift that came on, you know, with like this story. It's been building up to this. You know, the idea was that when Wally first came back, he was largely hands off, but then he basically like he met back up with the Titans and they all remembered who he was. And so from there it was, well, I wonder who else will remember who I am. And so it really became more of like an obsession. And we get these small things here and there. For example, like in this instance, he remembers who Eobard Thawne is. And that's really kind of a throwback to the return of Barry Allen's story by Mark Waid. You know, back in really post 1984, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Flash stories were taken up by a handful of people. You had like Mike Baron, and really like Baron's run was designed to kind of throw Wally in this situation where he was always under the shadow of Barry. And it was like, well, Barry died in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and now, you know, I've got to be the new Flash, and man, it's just so hard because I'm trying to live up to the legacy of Barry. But then when Mark Waid took over, Waid's stance was, okay, let's get this show on the road, because like people are tired of seeing Wally under the shadow of Barry. Let's actually like make Wally something cool. And that's why Mark Waid's Flash run is considered to be like the run of the Flash. It solidified Wally. But in one of the earlier stories, I would say the first major, like the first big story that Mark Waid wrote was the return of Barry Allen. And it was basically like the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths origin of Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. And that's cool because that's what this is. You're no Barry Allen. Like it's literally this whole situation playing out. You have like Wally West, who is part of the Justice League. You have like a lot of these really cool moments. And that's the interesting thing behind this is like, you can tell that Joshua Williamson is a fan because these are throwbacks to things that fans will remember. This is like a love letter to all the fans of like classic Wally West. Now, at this point, we pick up with the arrival of the Renegades. Now, we talked about this in like the previous prelude video that we did to the events of Flash War, which is basically that like in the 25th century, the rogues aren't really the rogues. Like the rogues don't really exist anymore. What you have is the Renegades, who are basically like good guys. They're more of like a police force of metahumans. But when you're, you know, classic Wally West, and when you're Barry Allen, and you've never met the Renegades, or at least as far as you're aware, you've never met the Renegades, you don't see them as Renegades. You just see them as like souped up rogues, and that have just kind of like change their name, but they still look the same. And that's exactly how they react. And so it's kind of cool because where Wally West is somewhat hot-headed, Barry kind of steps in and says, no, we need to kind of think things through. Now, this is where I would say Williamson seems to be hitting more towards the post-crisis, version of the Flash, as opposed to Wally West when we're talking about, 2004, 2005, 2006. And the reason why I say that is when Wally first became the Flash under like Mike Baron, when he basically stepped away from Kid Flash and replaced Barry, he was a hothead in a lot of ways. But over the writing of Mark Waid and like through the life experiences that Wally had, he became a lot more processed. He became a lot more wise. This really came as like a byproduct of not only Linda Park and Wally's own kids, but things like Impulse, Bart Allen being sent from the future into the past so Wally could train him on how to use his powers. It came from wisdom that was imparted by people like Max Mercury and Jay Garrick. So because of the fact that Wally was surrounded by so many, experienced speedsters, he really began to grow into his own and become a lot more experienced in terms of what it meant to be a Flash, and that you can't just run into every situation without really thinking about what's going on. And so that's where I would say this kind of seems to be a bit of a alteration from the Wally that we're used to, but it's not a bad thing because this kind of feeds into the idea that like Wally isn't really even sure what's going on in his own life. Like he's gaining memories all the time. And so where he remembers Linda Park, maybe he gains a memory later on where Linda Park died. And again, it's kind of crazy because he's basically remembering all the things as they happened before 2011. So for the most part, we kind of know how this is going to turn out with regards to people who have been reading The Flash for quite some time, or at least we have a general idea. But that's the beauty of Rebirth, is just because we believe we know how it's going to turn out doesn't mean it will turn out that way. Now, of course, Wally's response, being a little more hot-headed, is no. He takes Iris and he races off. Now, this is cool because with this situation, you could look at this and say, well, Iris is like the one real thing, the one real tangible thing that Wally West remembers that he can reach out and touch now. Because remember, he still keeps that barrier, that separation between himself and Linda, because the current day Linda doesn't know who Wally is. Now, it doesn't mean that she won't. I mean, it took Iris kind of waking up to realize who Barry was, or I'm sorry, who Wally was. And there's nothing to say that the same thing won't happen with Linda. But we talked about this in the previous videos. The fear that Wally has with Linda Park is that maybe he'll wake her up and she'll freak out and leave, and like she'll abandon him. She won't embrace him with open arms like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot about you. She'll just be like, okay, this is too much for me to handle, and she'll leave him. And so it'll be like losing her all over again. That's really like the biggest fear that he deals with. The other half of this, and this is one of the things that I love about Iris in the comics, is she's like, get your hands off of me. It's so cool. This is why I like Iris in the TV show and Iris in the comics, because they're very similar in terms of how they work. And so for the most part, when it comes to the Renegades basically chasing down, like Wally and Iris and trying to get a hold of Barry and like the new 52 Wally West and so on and so forth, they start kicking their powers in play. And that's when you learn that Golden Glider is not like the Golden Glider that we know. This version is a yellow lantern, and that's awesome. That's super cool. The other half of this though is that it does kind of shift up the nature of the Yellow Lanterns, and it does work because we've seen that in Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, right? Like just because someone is wielding a ring of Sinestro does not mean they have to be a villain. This is not uncharted waters. The other problem with this though, when it comes to Wally, is that while this is going on, he keeps getting these memory feeds that are fed in, just these memories that keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And that's something that I want you to notice here. They're coming at faster intervals. Now, it may just be the manner in which Williamson's been telling these stories and the way the stories are being told in like Titans, but the general gist was that classic Wally West came back in DC Universe Rebirth #1, and then he would get a jolt of a memory, and then it would be like 1 or 2 story arcs, and then he would get another one, and then it'd be another 1 or 2 story arcs, and then he would get another one. Now it's he gets one, and then bam, a couple minutes later he gets one, and then a couple minutes later he gets one. They're coming back faster and faster, and what this means is that all these memories of Wally are just pouring into his mind. And so from there, what happens is basically Commander Cold stops everything. He's like, look, something's going on here, but our orders are to get Iris West, bring her to the future, put her on trial for taking out Eobard Thawne. And so because of this, like, Commander Cold is no pun intended, he's kind of cold here, in the sense that he's like, hey, look, we'll help Wally, but like, you need to come with us. You don't come with us, Wally doesn't get any help. So, make your decision. And it's kind of crazy here because ultimately, like, they end up just kind of going along. All the speedsters end up going with them because they don't really trust the Renegades. They don't know anything about them. It's this group that looks like the Rogues that appears from a temporal portal and says, you got to come with us. You have to believe us. We're good guys. There's no reason to believe them. And so classic Wally, Barry, New 52 Wally West, they all basically travel with Iris and the Renegades to jump into the 25th century. The problem with this is that when they get there, everybody arrives except for classic Wally. And what we end up finding out is somebody screwed with the temporal device of Captain Cold so that Wally would be lost in transit. And so what we end up doing is transitioning over to Wally himself in what really looks kind of like a broken remnant of the Flash Museum. And as he goes through there, he basically starts getting these words from this guy. And he says like, this is your life. This is the museum of your life. This is everything you've lost. And this is when we start getting like these amazing Easter eggs, like showing Wally West when he was Kid Flash, showing his first encounter with Impulse, showing Max Mercury. But once he goes through here, like this person says like, this is your entire life. This is everything you know. Jai and Iris West, the children of Wally, are here. They're shown in kind of like a video feed of sorts. And so when the question is like, who are you? What is going on here? What we end up getting is the return of Hunter Zolomon. And Hunter Zolomon is amazing. Okay, so Eobard Thawne, the original Reverse Flash, he goes all the way back to the 1970s, right? Like he's pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths. Once Crisis on Infinite Earths happened in 1985, 1986, then we got like a new version of Eobard Thawne. And then following that version of Eobard Thawne, Jeff Johns took over the Flash story and he gave us another Reverse Flash named Hunter Zolomon. Now the difference between Eobard Thawne and Hunter Zolomon is that where Eobard Thawne was originally just like a massive fan of the Flash and then was obsessed with Barry, made himself look like Barry, and then traveled back into the past only to find out Barry had died, and then looked through the Flash Museum and realized he was destined to become his mortal enemy and went insane. Hunter Zolomon was totally different. Hunter Zolomon was basically a guy who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had a really, really crappy upbringing. He was involved in a conflict, lost the use of his legs, but he was a huge, I would say he worked alongside the Flash more so than anything else, worked alongside Barry as like a criminal profiler. The way he ended up becoming a villain was because once he basically lost everything that mattered to him, he basically went to the Flash and said like, help me run back in time. Use your cosmic treadmill, help me run back in time and fix everything that went wrong. And like the Flash said no. And so because of that, Hunter Zolomon's heart was just filled with anger and wrath at the fact that the Flash just wanted to hog all his power to himself. And so he basically found a way to copy the powers of the Flash, and he's been a villain ever since. But there's like history there. And that's why Hunter Zolomon says we were friends once, because they were. They were very good friends once. They worked alongside each other. The relationship between Hunter Zolomon and Wally West is like the Rebirth equivalent of August Hart and Barry Allen, in the sense that August Hart became Godspeed because of the fact that he was driven by a desire to kind of fix everything. Hunter Zolomon's motivations were a little bit different, but the pre-villainous nature, the pre-villainous relationship between himself and Wally was almost completely identical. Now, Hunter's idea is you have to destroy the Speed Force. Now, we don't know what effect that'll have. We don't know if destroying the Speed Force will lead to like the deaths of Jay Garrick and Max Mercury and Johnny and Jesse Chambers and like Giant Iris West and like, Impulse, like all these characters. We don't know if that's going to be the case. Instead, all we know is that like the Speed Force would be destroyed. But that's the question. What lengths is Wally willing to go to not only bring back all the speedsters who were there, or at least presumably do that, but also basically go back and like return things to the way that they're supposed to be. But it's kind of cool here because remember, Barry Allen tried this during the events of Flashpoint, and that's what screwed everything up. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.